Hello there. Thank you for taking a moment to watch this video, and on this particular training I want to talk to you about lead prioritization within your lead streams. Now hopefully at this point you've already watched all of the other lead stream specific videos, and maybe you've even set up some lead streams and you've been making calls using those lead streams. And of course if you've watched those videos then you probably already know a little bit about the lead prioritization in your lead streams. However, on this training, we're going to dive deep into the prioritization, and I'm even going to talk to you about a couple options that are available upon request. So let's jump into this. So for my training today, I actually created a lead stream specific for this. It's called my LeadStream Prioritization Training lead stream. It is a blind poll lead stream. It's distributing data from the LeadStream Prioritization Training folder. The receiving folder is an LS Prio campaign receiving folder. And I'm recycling back into the same lead stream. So let's jump back over to our contact manager, and here you can see my LeadStream Prioritization Training distribution folder. I've got 41 records in here, and I'm sorting this list based off of the last time the contacts were called. And what that does is that kind of illustrates how the system works by default. You'll see the newest uncalled leads at the top of the list. Here you can see the Oracle. He's at the top of the list, because he's never been called. He's received 0 phone calls using PhoneBurner. So the system will always prioritize newest, freshest, uncalled leads first and foremost. But then what? When the system starts to recycle data, that's where it gets a little bit more vague. Is it going to call Nick? Is it going to call the Vision? Is it going to call Lex? Who's it going to call? And of course, the answer to that does depend. The system out of the box is pretty straightforward in that, and so we're going to talk about that option first. And of course, to help me as we move through this process, I've actually created a spreadsheet that contains all 41 of my contacts, listed out with a few key data points that we want to take into consideration here. So obviously we got phone number and name in here because that's going to make it easy for you and me to keep track of who's who and what's what. But then I've got these other columns here. What are these columns here for? So this first option, column C, I want you to see the last date and time the contact was distributed. But on the back end, we actually keep track of another data point that kind of relates to this, but it's really only for contacts that couldn't be distributed. Maybe it was too early for them to be called. So if your team starts making calls in the morning East Coast and it's too early to call West Coast people, obviously, we don't want to call them, so we don't want them actually distributed to anybody, but we also don't want to lose track of them. So we actually have a data point on the back end. Again, it's related to last distributed date, but it's not the last distributed date. It's a 15-minute counter. Anytime a contact should have been distributed but couldn't for whatever reason, we add that 15-minute counter and then we try again. The next one is the last recycled date. I'm putting in the date and time here of when a contact was recycled, but on the back end, we're really just looking to see if a contact had been recycled previously. If they've never been recycled, boom, let's prioritize them. Let's make them a high priority contact. Now the next column here, column E, is the total calls. This is an optional prioritization item. You have to ask to get this activated on your account right now. It's not something that you can turn on yourself. This is a fantastic option to enable if you're calling real-time data. You see, real-time data you want to call more often when it's new and less often when it's old. And by setting up the prioritization based off of total calls, older data is automatically deprioritized. Because the more time somebody's been called, the more opportunity there is for other contacts to get called before them. So your contacts with fewer calls will get called more often than a contact that's been in the system for a while and maybe has 15 or 20 calls. Then column F, this is another option that you can enable on your account. So if you want this, go ahead and request it. But if you have a specific field on your account that you want to sort by, we can enable this for you, and then you can do this on a per lead stream basis. Now in my specific example, I'm using the letters A, B, C, D because I think it's going to be easier for me in the illustrations of the training. But a lot of times date fields are a really common and popular option for this. Then the next option, this is standard out of the box, last call date. We take into account the last time somebody was called, and we take the contacts that haven't been called the longest and move them up to the top of the list. And then of course, column H, the next option is date added. We're looking at the date a contact was created. So if we're looking at 2 contacts and everything else is all equal, we're going to look at the date and time that contact was added to the system. And then finally, the last thing that we look at is column I here, and that's the contact ID. Assuming everything else is equal, which is going to be pretty slim at this point, but it's still possible where we could have somebody whose total calls is exactly the same. The custom sort is exactly the same. The last time they were called was exactly the same, because you can have 2 people working a lead stream at the same time. You can have multiple people calling through the list at the same time. And the date they were added could have been at the exact same time because they were in the same list. But the one thing that will always be unique is the contact ID. So we will take the contact ID that is the smallest, and that one will be prioritized above the one that's larger. Again, it's not going to be very often that we have to fall back to the contact ID, but that is the very last prioritization option. So what does this mean in reality? So I'm going to move this off the screen. We'll be coming back to it probably later, but let's jump over to our Leads tab. We've got our 41 records. I'm going to begin a dial session. Okay, so now I'm connected. Before we start dialing, let's review. I'm going to move this off the window for a second. Let's jump over to contacts. The Oracle should be our first contact that we're calling. Going back to my spreadsheet here. The Oracle's listed here, never been distributed, never been recycled, doesn't have any calls. Prioritization of F, never been called. Date added is similar or the same as everybody else. Contact ID is obviously different. But since he's the only record on here who's never been called, he should be priority number 1, and he should be called. So let's check and see if that happens. Let's go ahead and start dialing. And there it is. We are calling the Oracle. I'm going to go ahead and end that call. So now that we've called the Oracle, that one was the easy one. Anybody on the list that's never been called, never been recycled, man, we need to call them now, right? So let's move the dial session window off the page. But who's next? We're dealing with standard prioritization now. We're not taking into account total calls or custom fields. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at column C. Have we ever attempted to distribute the lead before? Again, this is just that 15-minute counter if we couldn't call them because it was too early. I don't have any of those contacts on this list. I'm doing this test in the middle of the day, so nobody's going to really qualify for that. And it's tough for me to kind of illustrate that here anyway. So the next thing we're looking for are any contacts that, of course, have not recycled. Now, on my list, everybody here has previously recycled. So it's our next thing. We're not taking advantage of any of the special options yet, so now we're looking at the last call day. So we need to look here and find who was last called. These 3 contacts is who it's between, Nick, Thor, and the Vision. Now, I don't have the exact date and time down to the millisecond, but the system is going to take into account seconds as well. So my guess is Nick is going to be next on the list, because Nick is the next one on the list when we sort by last call date, because that's going to take into account all of the date information that we have, date and time information that we have for all of the contacts when we're sorting by this. So let's test that. I'm going to bring the Oracle over. We're going to disposition this one as unavailable, and we're going to call our next contact. And you'll see Nick is in fact our next call. Let's go ahead and end that call, and we'll move this on off the screen. So who's next? Going back here, it's going to be between this one and this one. But now I want to turn on another option here. So I have now enabled my lead stream by a custom field. I'm going to set my priority field, and I'm going to do it descending. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's go back to our dial session here. So now when I disposition Nick and I move on to my next call, whoops, sorry about that. I forgot that I'd set a daily lead limit for that lead stream. So let's jump over here. Let's edit that recipient. And I'm going to bump this up. Let's do 11. That way we can call at least 3 more. while we're doing some more testing. And I'm doing that just to make sure that I'm kind of metering how I work through this data. Obviously, you don't have to put daily lead limits for yours, but I'm doing that specifically for my test. So let's jump back over here to our leads and let's go ahead and begin our dial session again. Okay, so before we start dialing, let's talk about prioritization once again, because we've made changes to our lead stream and we need to talk about, okay, who do we think is going to be called next? Who's next up on the list to be called? Let's take a look at our spreadsheet. So I'm going to bring over my Excel spreadsheet. If you're remembering, Nick Fury was our last person to be called. And based off of the standard out-of-the-box prioritization, that was right. We called Oracle. And of course, I updated this after I ended that other session. Didn't make you have to watch me update that. So here you can see the Oracle's now been called. Nick has now been called. That's our call record from Nick. Thor was going to be next on the list. But then we went and made that change on the system to prioritize records based off of a custom field. So we're looking for records that are on our list to be called. And we're sorting these highest to lowest. So the letter that is the highest letter is going to be called first. So our system is going to be looking for all of the G's first. And of course, once again, as a reminder, this is only in effect once every contact that has not been called, has not been distributed, has not been recycled, has been called. So we're prioritizing these G's first. So here we've got our G, Jonah Hex. Come down here, we got another G. And we've got another G. So here there's several people who are G's. You can see I've got it all in alphabetical order here. But what is it looking for, right? Let's think through the prioritization. So the first thing it's doing is looking for anybody who has skipped 15 minutes ago or whatnot. We're going to call those because they were prioritized. But we don't have anybody that fits that. And then we're looking for anybody who wasn't recycled. And we don't have anybody that fits that. And so the next thing we're looking at is the G's. Okay. Now we're going to take all of these G's and look at them. So what's the next thing we're looking at? Last call date. So we got this G was called 2/14/2023. This G was 12/15. So that one's next on list of those two. And then we got 10/3. So that one's ready to be called. 3/30/2023. That one's not going to be next in priority. 3:30. That one shouldn't be prioritized. So really what we're looking at, we probably should be seeing this one called, if I'm remembering correctly, of all of the ones we went through. That one looks like it's been the longest since they last received a phone call. So this should be the contact that pops up on the screen next, because we're looking at the records based off of the custom field, looking for the highest letter. G is our highest letter. And then we're looking at the last call dates. There are no other records in this list that their last phone call was before this one. So, and so all of these other things really don't matter, right? Because this is the right one. So let's see if we're right here. So we got York Brown. I'm going to move this off the screen and start dialing. Did I miss one here? So the question, who was the question? Where is he? There he is. I was wrong. Sorry, guys. You guys get the benefit of looking at a video, but this one was definitely the older one. So I was wrong. The system was right. But now, if I were to mark this one as unavailable, call the next contact. Now my contact shows up. So anyway, you saw me and my bad eyes scanning through that. So let's go ahead and hit live answer and end the call. So that's if we're prioritizing based off of a custom field. And of course, we can do this highest to lowest or lowest to highest. And sometimes you want to do that based off of a date field. Totally up to you how you want to do that. But that is an option, and you can request to have that option enabled for your account. But there's one other option that I want to talk to you about, and that is total calls. So we can update your account to prioritize based off of total calls in addition to all of this other stuff. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you prioritize based off of total calls, What's nice about that is it's going to take all of the contacts that have been called one time and put those together in one group, and then it's going to look at the next criteria. So for example, let's assume these were the only ones that had been called one time. It would call this Lex Luthor because he has the highest letter for the prioritization. But of course, it would actually take all of these ones into account and then group all of those based off of the letters, right? So it would look, are there any G's that have been called one time? And I don't know if there are any. It doesn't look like there are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable that. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so I've got that enabled now. And so let's just talk through this. And I should be able to do this without having to start another dial session because I think I've got one more dial in me before I hit my limit this time. Let's go back to our sheet here. We're looking at ones. All of our ones. Oh, look at that. There. Oh, no. He's been called. So he's now at 2 calls. He's the one we're calling right now. So he's not going to be called next. But looking at all of my G's, I don't think I have any G's that would fit in there with one phone call. So what is the next one? F's. So we got this F, and let's highlight these. That way I don't do what I did last time, right? So we're going to highlight that one. Highlight that one. Highlight that one. That one's not it. Highlight that one. Highlight that one. Now, of course, you guys are all watching the video. If I missed one, you can sit there and laugh at me. That's fine. So of all of the number ones, these are all of the F's. So the system is going to be looking at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 records. And then the next thing it's going to look at is the last call date. Who hasn't been called for the longest amount of time? Right? So in this particular case, I think I have them sorted in that order here, and that is Lex Luthor. So I believe Lex Luthor should be our next phone call. Now there's always a chance that changes I make on the back end are not going to affect the dial session that I'm currently in, but I believe it will. And I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that this works as expected since I'm recording this training. So let's go ahead and click unavailable, next contact, and there it is, Lex Luthor. I'm going to go ahead and end that call. Now, before we wrap up our training here, I do want to point out one other option for prioritization that you can ask to have enabled on your account is to reverse the date added prioritization, the creation date. By default, we look for the newest, freshest contacts first when we get to this element of the prioritization, but we can reverse that. So if you would prefer to focus on older leads first, you can make that request and then we can adjust that for you. So anyway, thank you for taking a moment to watch this video. I know this was a bit longer than normal, but I hope this will help you understand how the system is going to prioritize your data when you add it to a lead stream so that you and your team can get more done in less time using the power of PhoneBurner. Thanks again and happy dialing.